Dr. R. Keith Sawyer is a professor of education at the University of North Carolina. He did his computer science degree from MIT. Then in 1990, he began his doctoral studies in psychology, where he studied creativity with Dr. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, author of best-selling books such as Flow and Creativity. His new book, Learning to See Inside the World's Leading Art and Design Schools, explore how professional artists and designers create successfully and consistently and how they teach others to become professionals like them. He published 20 books and over 120 scientific articles. He is one of the leading scientific experts on creativity, collaboration, and learning. He has been a jazz pianist over 40 years and spent several years playing piano with Chicago theater groups. How are you, Professor Keith Sawyer?
Oh, I'm doing very well, thank you. And how are you?
Good, thank you, and thanks for your time. First time I'm talking to someone who has been mentored by a great guy, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. And many of us, we read, we experienced. I'm a big fan of his flow theory. So please share, like, how was he and how was that enlightening journey?
Yes, that's right, Dr. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and you pronounced it very correctly. So it takes some training to get the pronunciation right.
I got trained into that because there is one literature I found and he actually pronounced it like this. So that's how I picked it.
That's right. That's right. Yes, I started my PhD program at the University of Chicago in 1990. Mike, we called him Mike Csikszentmihalyi, and he preferred to be called Mike. He never wanted to be called Dr. Csikszentmihalyi, which was very kind of him. I think he realized it was a difficult name to pronounce for Americans. It's a Hungarian name, and yeah, so we called him Mike. So I'll talk about him as Mike right now. When I got there in the fall of 1990, I had, like a lot of PhD students, all of my required courses were scheduled for me, so I didn't have a lot of flexibility. But I did have an opening for one elective course, and he was teaching a course called the Psychology of Creativity. I didn't know there was a field called the Psychology of Creativity. I was getting a PhD in psychology, but hadn't yet realized that studying creativity was a possibility. So I was very fortunate that I connected with him as soon as I arrived at the University of Chicago. He's a very wonderful person. He's passed on now several years ago, but very gentle, very warm and supportive. He was a wonderful advisor, and I think all of his students felt the same way. He was a wonderful mentor and a brilliant man, and I think maybe even beyond the raw intelligence, he had a creative mind. He was the kind of intellectual who identifies new problems and new kinds of questions to ask. And that's, I think, what distinguishes his career is being the first one to talk about, for example, this notion of problem finding creativity. I was just rereading his 1976 book, which is called The Creative Vision. It's a study of art students. And that's, I think, the first publication that identifies problem finding creativity, 1976. And now we talk about, well, ill-structured problems and wicked problems. He did it first. So yeah, it's very impressive academic and a very impressive individual.
In a lot of spiritual talk, I heard where monks or spiritual gurus mention this flow theory and they always talk about there is a spiritual element into it. And I guess the way you are describing, somewhere he was also connected to that almighty or, some bigger universe, I guess.
Oh, it's interesting that you asked that. Yeah, I think there's a connection with a strand in psychology called a humanistic psychology or humanist psychology going back to the 1940s and the 1950s. And the focus there was on the human experience and what does it mean to be a fully realized individual. That approach in psychology, for most, at least in the United States, for most of the 20th century, that was not the focus of psychology. Psychologists tended to focus on, especially psychiatrists, they would focus on negative characteristics of the human experience, or they'd be focusing on psychological disorders. There was very little study of human flourishing in the 1970s and 1980s. It was dominated by a sort of behaviorist approach, and then a cognitive psychological approach, which was almost like a computational model of the mind, the cognitive psychology. But there really wasn't anyone studying human flourishing and fulfillment. And that was Mike's book in 1990 called Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience. And I don't recall him talking in spiritual terms, and we never did talk about religion. He was very much an empirical social scientist. And I think that's the power of what he does. He takes a scientific psychological approach, but then he ends up on some of these ancient truths, right? Ancient wisdom of the nature of human experience. If you read the very beginning of his book, his 1990 book called Flow, and this is how he leads into the book. He says, what is the peak human experience? What does it mean to be fully realized? And he would use the word happiness. He would say, what makes someone happy? What is happiness? His first answer was, happiness is not, or peak experience is not being comfortable and having everything be easy for you. Being relaxed and being comfortable sitting on the couch and being full after a nice meal. And he said, that's not the pinnacle of human experience. That's not the peak. So we know happiness doesn't just mean the absence of bad things happening to you. So what is happiness? And that's the nature of peak experience. And that's where his research went that led up to the 1990 book. And then we can talk about that if you like. So what is peak experience? So we know it's not being relaxed. It doesn't mean life is easy. But it also, you can't have peak experience if your life is miserable either. So then that's why, he wrote an entire book about it. It's somewhere in the middle of difficulty and easiness. And that's where the profoundness of his book is.
Now, very fascinating. Now, I'm concentrating on your work, and today we will talk about psychology of seeing for creativity, because that's the word you are actually portraying in a different way. See, I have seen that, and learning to see for creativity and all. What exactly is this seeing you mean to be creative?
It's my latest book called Learning to See. So you're exactly right. That's what my focus has been on for many years now. And the title of a book being called Learning to See, it might seem like an odd title because we all know how to see. Any one of us who has vision and isn't blind, we see the world every minute of every day unless we're sleeping. So what does it mean to say learning to see? The subtitle of my book is Inside the World's Leading Art and Design Schools. So I'm talking about a particular type of seeing that's associated with high creativity in the visual arts and visual art and design. And I went and interviewed over 100 professional artists and designers. And these were all interesting to me, these 100 artists and designers, because they all also are professors in professional schools of art and design. So their mission in life, in addition to creating their own works, their mission is to apprentice the next generation of professional artists and designers. And I asked them, what is it that makes your work successful? What is your own creative practice? And then I asked them, how do you teach other people to have this kind of effective creative practice? All of them gave me very similar answer. They said, we're teaching students how to see. They never said, we're teaching students how to be creative. As a matter of fact, they did not like that word when I said, how do you teach students how to be creative? I actually did ask them that at the beginning of my research in the first few interviews, and they were very uncomfortable. They would say back to me, they would say, we're not teaching people how to be creative. We're not teaching students how to be creative. They would say, you can't teach students how to be creative. And then I didn't know anything about learning to see at that time because I'm not a painter. I'm not an artist. I'm not a designer. I'm a musician. I'm a jazz pianist. So when I started doing interviews with painters and graphic designers, I didn't know what distinguishes them. I came as an outsider. So when they would tell me I'm teaching students how to see, I had to go through my own process of figuring out what that means. And they would tell me it takes 2 years before students can learn to see in this special and unique way. So unfortunately, I can't tell you in our interview how to see, but I can try to kind of come at it in different ways and do the best I can.
Thank you. We will see how we can peel one after another for our audience. As we all know, Margaret Mead's very famous quote that children must be taught how to think, not what to think. Do we need to recraft now for creativity? Like children must be taught how to see, not what to see?
Could you do this with children? I think so. But let me step back and talk about how we would need to structure education if we wanted our students, if we wanted our children to learn how to be creative. Because my book, Learning to See, is about professional level art and design. So these are maybe 19-year-old, 20-year-old. Some of them are mature adults in their mid 20s. So these professional artists and designers are teaching a very high level of how to see. So I don't think we should do that with 10-year-old children. But what should we be doing if we want children to learn in ways that prepare them to be creative? Yes, I think it's wonderful that you mentioned the Margaret Mead quotation. Absolutely. I still assign her writings in my undergraduate education classes. It's a classic, her essay on this. I would say when people ask me how to teach children how to be creative, I generally say you can't teach them how to be creative in an abstract way. You have to teach children the subject matter in a different way because being creative with a particular type of knowledge, that's what we're teaching them. We're teaching them how to be creative with the stuff they're learning. So we're teaching them math, or we're teaching them physics, or we're teaching them history. What do we mean when we say we want children to be creative? We don't mean just creative like higher IQ, that they get a higher creativity quotient. We mean how can we teach them to be creative with what they know, with the stuff that they're learning? And to get them to that point, in my research, my claim is that you have to learn knowledge of a different type. If you want to be creative in physics, you need to learn physics in a different way. You are acquiring a different kind of understanding. And I would contrast it, let's say, between a traditional form of instruction where it's like lecturing. It's you pass facts to the learners and they memorize the facts. And then they give you the facts on the test to prove that they've memorized the facts. That type of knowledge does not support creative behavior because that type of knowledge is static, it's frozen, it's not adaptable. So if you learn in this kind of way where you're memorizing information, you have perhaps acquired a large database of knowledge, but it doesn't prepare you to be creative. The reason why I'm talking about types of knowledge is if you have learned this kind of static, frozen knowledge, if you've internalized a database of facts, you are not going to be creative with that knowledge. It doesn't matter how many creativity classes we give you. I could give you creativity class all day, every Friday. But if you've learned knowledge simply by memorizing it, you can't fix that with creativity training. You have to teach the knowledge in a different way. So the knowledge they're learning in every class, in every subject, is a kind of adaptive knowledge, adaptable knowledge. Sometimes I call it deep knowledge. It's a deeper conceptual understanding. I think it's a big challenge because, for schools, for teachers, because if you can teach everything the same way you've always been teaching it, and then let's say you add in a creativity class on Friday afternoon, and then you can go to the head of your school and say, hey, now we're teaching our children how to be creative, but you don't change anything else. I don't think that will work. That's relatively easy, but it won't work. What's very hard is changing everything, changing the way you teach every class. So I gave you a long answer to how can we teach children how to be creative, but the short version of it is I don't think you can teach just creativity on its own. I think you have to teach everything in a different way that prepares students to be creative with what they're learning.
That means two things. One is learning mathematics from various different ways. And also, not only mathematics, to learn mathematics, if you're learning, I don't know, psychology or art or humanities or whatever, that will also putting an impact on how you are absorbing this conceptual knowledge, right? Both ways.
I think so. That you would have to learn math in a particular way, but then, yes, the other subjects as well.
Okay, you mentioned a couple of things, but is there any other ways we can build up this seeing as a skill? Is it a skill or is it a journey of discovering I don't know, something, ourselves maybe.
Yes, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up. So it is now I'll say something about what goes on when, in art and design school when these students are learning how to see. It really is a process of personal discovery. I'll give you an example. So let's say you're taking a painting class and your conception of painting might be what I call a linear creative process, where you sit down at a canvas and you conceptualize an image of what you want to paint, and then you start painting and you execute the painting. So that I call a linear model because you start with the idea and then you execute the idea. And a lot of art students do this when they're 18 years old and they come into art school. They have a lot of technical skill because you can't get into art school unless you have a portfolio and you have some ability, some technical ability. But professors say this kind of linear path is not an effective way to generate creative work. And well, what is an effective way? The effective way to generate creative work is to start without an idea, to start engaging in the creative process. And while you're engaging in the creative process, ideas emerge from that practice over the hours and the days and the weeks. And it, to some extent, is unpredictable. You don't know what's going to happen. There's an ambiguity to the process. And that's what gives it its creative potential, that you're engaging in a creative process and you don't know where it's going. So it's improvisational, and it's an interesting way of being, I don't know, directed and undirected both, because you are guiding the process, the creative process, to some extent, but you also are leaving it open because it's a matter of exploration. You don't know what you're doing yet. So how do you find out what you're doing? You're putting something on the canvas. The way you find out what you're doing is you have to be able to see what you've done. And that's a mysterious thing to say. So you've done it, it's on the canvas, but you don't know what it is yet. So that is how you can get to personal discovery, because the act of engaging with this material of paint on canvas that puts something about yourself out there externally that you weren't able to see simply by meditating and looking inside. You've externalized a part of yourself and you don't know what it is yet. So it is a process of personal discovery. So that's one piece of what it means to learn how to see. It's to learn how to see yourself. It's to learn how to see what you have done and to try to figure out what it is. What is it? What is this thing that I've done? And that type of seeing is, it really is seeing yourself reflected back at you from the creative work. So you can see how different that process is from the linear process. With a linear process, you conceive a work that you're going to make, and then you make it. So you're putting it on the canvas, you know what it's going to be. If you paint it differently from what your image was, then you know you made a mistake and you go back and change it. So there's no personal discovery, right? You're not learning anything. So this is what these professors will tell me. They'll say, if students do this, then they won't learn anything. They just will do what they already know how to do. And when they say they won't learn anything, what they mean is they won't learn how to see. They won't have this experience of exploration and of personal discovery.
So that means this seeing or seeing differently or learn to see are these kind of synonym to curiosity, openness?
Part of engaging in the process, yes, there's a curiosity and there's an openness, but I'm talking about a dialogue with an external object. So whatever it is that you're making. So if you're a painter, you're making paint on canvas. If you're a sculptor, you're molding something out of clay. If you're a graphic designer, you're designing a poster, maybe a website. But there's always something, an artifact that you are generating. So that's maybe not all types of creativity are this way. I think they all are to some extent, but certainly with art and design, there's a material artifact and you are generating an object. And the creativity of art and design is that at the end of the process, you have a painting. And you say, here's my painting, I'm putting it in the art gallery. Or you're a graphic designer and you've designed a poster, concert posters. So it's going on the walls all over the city. So the purpose of visual art is to generate an external artifact. I'm talking about a process of how to generate something like this. So one way, someone hires you to design a poster for a concert. So you could just do the linear method and it might be a fine poster, but you haven't learned anything about yourself and you haven't advanced your understanding of design. So I'm talking about people who are in art and design school. I mean, if you're 40 years old and you're being hired to do posters for your career, maybe that's not a matter of personal discovery. This is how professors view their job to help people learn how to be more creative. So yes, it's exploratory, it's curiosity, I'm trying to, when I answer these questions, I'm trying to answer like an actual artist would answer. So I said, I'm not sure, none of them said curiosity to me. I don't think that's the way an artist would refer to it, but they would talk about openness and exploration. They would talk about the ability to thrive in the face of ambiguity. I would hear this a lot, the importance of ambiguity.
Mm. After studying over 50 institutions across 20 plus disciplines, you kind of come to a conclusion, then that's why your book is that creativity can be taught or seeing can be taught.
Yes.
It's a vast subject, I know, but can you give us some nuggets like how we can go about it?
Oh, absolutely. So yes, you're right. I interviewed over 100 artists and designers who are professionals. These are, they're in their late 40s, they're in their 50s, so they have a lot of experience and success. And then they are teaching in these. I ended up talking to people who had been connected with over 50 leading art and design schools in the United States. I haven't studied out of the United States, but I do have some colleagues who've done similar studies in Europe, and seems like it's very similar in Europe. So that's over 100 professors at 50 different institutions. And then I went to 20 different disciplines, fine art disciplines and design disciplines. And what I wanted to get at was the shared underlying essence of the creative process across all of these disciplines. And I thought if the same things are happening in 20 different disciplines at 50 different institutions, then that's pretty powerful. There must be some lessons for all of us. So yes, now I'm getting to answer your question, but to say this is why I think I've identified this shared essence of creativity. And the chapters in my book are clustered around, for I guess I would say the main finding is to start engaging in a process where you generate something apart from yourself. So you have to get something out in the world very quickly. If you talk about the design world or high technology, people will talk about prototyping or rapid prototyping. So that's exactly right. Rapid prototyping it works. So that's an example of getting something out in the world as quickly as possible. So I would say maybe quick advice, don't think too hard. don't wait for an idea. If you wait for an idea, you'll just have mental block and you'll get frustrated. But if you're stuck, the solution is always to start making something. And then what you make, don't expect for that to be perfect and don't expect for that to be the final work. That's just your first attempt and your first draft if you're a writer. Same thing happens for writers that I'm talking about for artists and designers. You're going to do a draft, it's not going to be great. You're going to be doing a lot of revisions. So yes, writers say a lot of the same things about the creative process. Get something out into the world and then interact with it with the understanding that it's not perfect, that it's just the first thing. And it's going to be more effective if you generate something and you're not really sure what it is, because then you can engage in that process of discovery. There's something inside of you. You already know everything about yourself consciously. So how are you going to discover something new about yourself that you don't know already? That's the power of this kind of, I'd say, iterative and improvisational process of getting something out into the world and then having a dialogue. I guess you could say a dialogue with this object. So think of it as something apart from yourself and interact with it and see what that thing is giving back to you. If it's a painting, what is it that this painting is telling me? And writers will say this all the time, that they have a dialogue with the text that they're generating. So I think this kind of dialogue with an external thing, a lot of people refer to it as making. And there's here in the U.S. we have something called the maker movement. This finding that embodied cognition, extended cognition, getting something out into the world enhances your cognitive abilities. But I also think it enhances this process of personal exploration and personal growth.
And on the same breath, you talked about building distance from your work and creative resilience. Okay, first of all, what is it? Then I have another question.
Oh, the creative distance from your work. So that's building on what I had just said about the importance of externalizing something into a physical artifact, into an object, and then interacting with it as if it is a separate being. I mean, a lot of creators, a lot of artists will talk about what they've generated as if it has its own personality or its own identity. So yes, there is a distance between you and what you've generated. And it's difficult, and these again are professors who tell me it's difficult for students to be able to do this. Beginning students who haven't mastered this ability to see, they tend to identify very closely to what they've generated, and then they view any kind of critique of that work as a personal attack. So having that distance from what you've generated helps you see it more clearly, I guess, because you're not being defensive about the fact that you generated it. The critic is helping you see what's in the work. So yeah, that's in a sense distancing yourself to keep yourself from having that kind of defensive reaction, which will block your openness, right?
If someone is creative, then definitely they're going through a lot of rejections. A lot of people are saying no to it. A lot of people are not resonating with it. Even self-doubt creeps many times. How to keep the face above the water and staying creative?
Yes, failure is a huge issue for anyone engaged in a creative process of the type I'm describing, because the nature of this kind of exploratory creative process is that you don't know what's going to happen. And what often happens, you could think of as a failure. But again, this is professors talking to me. What do they do when their students get to a point of failure? That's very stressful for anyone, but it's certainly stressful in a university class where you're going to get a grade and you're worried about failing a class. So failure isn't a happy thing. A lot of people who study creativity will talk about failure like it's such a wonderful opportunity to fail. It just changed your mindset about failure. So, but no, it's difficult emotionally. So one thing these professors have to do is they have to support students emotionally when they have these moments of failure. But once you get past the emotional response of feeling insecure, like you're going to be a horrible artist and you're never going to be successful in your career and you should drop out of school. So, yeah, so first of all, you have to get over that. Then you're able to do what is creatively important, which is to see the failure in the context of everything else that you're doing, and then putting it together in a way that will allow that failure to speak to you about the bigger project. So it's never the case that everything you've done is a failure. A failure is one thing. There's a lot of other things you did that are not failures. And anything that's valuable that you can create is a complex object. It's not just one thing. So there's the failure piece, and then there's all the other pieces that aren't failures. Once you learn how to see, this is one of the capabilities of learning how to see, is that you can see these failures in the context of everything else that's going on, and you can see it as information that can help you see everything else in the system differently. And in that sense, failure can be very beneficial. It's one of those things that's hard to describe because it's kind of paradoxical. But when you learn how to see, you do develop this ability to see failures in a different way. I mean, no one's happy about failing, but it is often an opportunity to change your perception in a good way.
As you are also an expert on collaboration, this is a debate that what is original? Nothing is original. It is inspired on something or the other. And then you are actually presenting it in a different way, or sometimes not even different way, but you know. So this creativity, is it an individual journey or always a collective one?
I think it's both, absolutely. So it's I think of levels of analysis, you could say. So individual creativity, creative process. These artists and designers I'm talking about, they're painting alone. They're not painting in a collaborative group. Graphic designers that I study, they're designing by themselves. They're not designing in a group. So this new book of mine really is about solitary creativity. But a lot of my career has been the studies of groups, and I put them at a higher level because groups are composed of people. So each individual is always being creative as an individual, and then you come together in a group, and there are numerous people together in the group. So, the question for a scientist or a psychologist studying creativity, we know a lot about how individuals create. So, what happens when we put four individuals together into a group? Well, we have four different individuals creating. So, maybe is it four times the creativity? Well, if it is, then who cares about the group? You could have the four people stay in their offices and then you put them together in a group and it's four times as creative. If they stay in their offices, it's four times as creative. So, what value do you get from a group? The only value from a group would be if it's greater than four times the individual creativity. It's what I would think of as, the whole being greater than the sum of the parts, is a saying that people use. And I use a more technical term I call emergence. There's something emerges from the interaction of the four individuals that results in something new and different that isn't simply additive of the individuals. And so that's what I see my own experience as a jazz pianist performing in jazz ensembles. That type of group interaction. You've got a drummer, a bass player, keyboard player, saxophone, guitar, trumpet. So all of those musicians are not just playing as individual creators, in parallel. It's not additive. So it's the musical interaction, the interactional dynamics among the member of the ensemble that result in the emergence of something that is more than just the addition of the individual players. So yeah, the potential for group creativity is for that higher level emergent creativity, something that is more than just the addition of the individual creativity.
Because we are talking about this group dynamics and in this creative zone, where ego sits or how we can get rid of ego from it. Because that's a very complicated element sometimes come and screw the whole situation.
Right, right. Yeah, ego can mean a lot of different things, but I'll give you one example from my own experience in improvisational theater. I don't know how globally universal this is, but in the US, we have a genre of theater where the actors perform on stage without a script. And they don't perform as solo actors, but they perform a scene with multiple actors. So you have multiple actors engaging in a conversation and they have a relationship and events and crises happen on stage, but none of it is scripted ahead of time. Everything happens through the improvisation of the different actors on stage, but no single actor is determining where the scene is going to go. The scene develops through the successive lines of dialogue of the individuals, and every single one of those lines of dialogue is created, improvised, and the other actor doesn't know what you're going to say. So you have to respond very quickly as if you did know what they were going to say. But it's very difficult to do this, and the reason why I described improv theater, it's a genre of creativity where if you have an ego, it will not work at all. Because what the ego does is it gets you to focus on your own creativity and it makes you try to seem brilliant and creative on stage. There's an audience out there. So your ego, you want to be the funniest person. You want to be the best actor. Any one actor is trying to do this, and what happens is it destroys the collaborative dynamic of the scene because you only get that kind of emergence of a successful dramatic performance if all of the actors are listening closely to each other and responding to each other. You can't perform a scene with just one person being brilliant. There has to be the interactional dynamic. So it's a great example of when ego blocks effective creativity. And in this case, it's a kind of ego of being visible in front of an audience. So you want to be the one that, like the best actor. So that kind of ego, yes, is going to destroy the group dynamic.
Another thing is because we are talking about this art and let's say under the art, films and everything like comes into that bracket. Two questions. What makes something which is critical but not massy and or popular, so to speak, and one became very popular but not that critically acclaimed? Because this is also it comes in the
Oh, that's
spectrum of
interesting.
creativity, right?
Right, right. Yeah, that connects with the sociology of art, where I've done some writing on this as well in a book I wrote called Explaining Creativity, the Science of Human Innovation. I have a chapter in there on the sociology of art, or sociology of creativity. So when you talk about something critically acclaimed, you're talking about something that has been judged creative by a small group of very knowledgeable people, right? So these are, I guess we can call them experts or connoisseurs. and then something that has mass popularity or mass appeal. There's so many people who like it that they can't all be experts and very, very knowledgeable about the industry or the nature of the creative process. People who engage closely in the professional practice of a creative field have an ability to see things that others don't have because they're intimately involved in the professional practice of that field. So if you have been, I don't know, if you produced your own movie and you're looking at someone else's movie, you're going to notice a lot going on the screen because of your own personal experience as a movie producer. There's just no way you can learn to see those things if you haven't done it yourself. So that's part of the nature of professional expertise in creative fields. So, okay, so now you've got judgments by the very knowledgeable people of, critically acclaimed of what's good. And you've got judgments by the general population of what's good. Creativity research has discovered repeatedly that if you take the judgments of experts, they tend to be highly correlated. Connoisseurs, experts in a creative field, they tend to have very similar evaluative criteria, I guess I can say. And then when you have a broad audience of people who won't necessarily be experts and knowledgeable, their ratings of quality vary much more dramatically. That wasn't your question, but it's an interesting creativity finding that the more you know, the more likely your judgments are to be similar.
Okay. That means what? When some art form becomes very, very popular, does that touch the truth chord or some hidden emotional chord within us? What exactly happens then?
Hmm. I don't know. I can only guess. I'm thinking creativity research. Does it have anything to say about? I think maybe in my own case, I might be thinking too much like a cognitive psychologist. So when I think about what works are going to resonate with people, I tend to think about their structural features. Yeah, I'm not very good at thinking about emotion in that way, but, and I'm not a psychologist who studies emotion either. So I'm sure there are certain kinds of narrative forms or structures that result in certain types of emotional responses, but I'm not familiar with that type of psychology research.
So we are almost end of our podcast, and the last question to you, which I have to ask you because today's day and age, everyone is, I should say, confused with this bloody AI thing. So how you are seeing creativity in the age of generative AI? Making films, songs, stories, art, everything is kind of happening through that. So this so-called creativity definition is getting blurred or changed or changing. So how you say it?
Right, you're right. It's unavoidable, this topic, and I have to admit that I use generative AI all the time. I have a $20 a month subscription to ChatGPT, but anytime I ask it to write something, I never like it. So I do not use ChatGPT for my own writing. I think I'm a better writer than ChatGPT, so thankfully, but it probably is a better writer than people who aren't professional writers. I don't know about that, but in my case, no, that doesn't work for me to use ChatGPT as a writer. But I did a Substack post last year, and the title was "I'm a creativity researcher and I'm not impressed with Gen AI." But I had a unique twist for me on why am I not impressed with Gen AI when I use it all the time. I'm talking like a psychologist and a psychological researcher. My interest as a psychologist is how people work. I'm interested in humans and in the human mind and what goes on in the mind when people are being creative. What I think anyone who is an expert on AI will agree, I think, that Gen AI systems, neural nets, are not creating the way people do. The process they use to generate the creative output is completely different from what goes on when a person is creative. So me as a psychologist studying people, Gen AI doesn't help me because it does not create like people do. So that's what I mean when I say I'm a creativity researcher and I'm not impressed with Gen AI. Gen AI does not help me understand how people create. So that's me thinking like a cognitive psychologist. But then there are all the other questions, which are, let's say, economic. Like what will happen when all the graphic designers get put out of work and why should anyone go to art school anymore? Because we don't need artists. So yeah, I would say those are sort of economic or financial workplace concerns. But for my concerns as a psychologist studying creativity, I haven't gotten any value out of what's going on inside of a Gen AI neural network.
Hmm. So that means what? The human exploration or the human side of things will remain as it is, it will flourish as you speak earlier. And the economic side, don't know how that will affect these yet. Is that the conclusion?
I think so. So going all the way back to the beginning of our interview, when I was talking about this process of externalizing a part of yourself into a material object, and then engaging in a dialogue with that external object and learning how to see as a process of discovering yourself through what the work you have generated. No, Gen AI doesn't do anything like that. I mean, just hearing me describe it, you can tell, of course, ChatGPT isn't doing that. I mean, you might say, who cares? ChatGPT is doing it better than your stupid dialogue thing, but it's very different from the kind of creativity that I associate with people. And I do believe that this type of human creative process of discovery, of having a dialogue with what you're generating, I think that results in a kind of problem discovery, of discovering new problems. Whereas someone who likes AI is always going to criticize anything I say that's critical of AI. But I don't think AI is good at coming up with good problems, or what for a creativity researcher we would call problem finding or problem discovery. This is the power of this kind of nonlinear creative process that I've been describing, that professional artists and designers follow, that dialogue with ambiguity, not knowing what you've done, acting with the intention of not knowing what it is you've done, because you know that doing something when you're not sure what it is, that has the potential to give something back to you and surprise you with some idea or some new problem formulation. Gen AI doesn't discover new problems. It solves problems that are presented to it. I think it's still the unique ability of humans to come up with good new problems.
On that, we should end our podcast here. Thank you. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun.